decided to interview one of my professors, Dr. Tonda. He does tons of genetic research on campus. He lets students get involved. He's had multiple research papers uh, produced. So I thought it would be interesting to interview him because I think genetics brings up lots of ethical dilemmas and concerns. Um, I think overall, one of the most interesting takeaways from my conversation with him was some of his biggest ethical dilemmas come from who exactly gets credit for what, who's the second publisher, who's the first publisher, who gets to put their name on these research publications. And a lot of times, ethical issues with are you wanting to put your name on this paper and be involved in this research in order to up, say, your level of maybe education or to try to get a job? Is there an agenda behind why you want your name on this paper? Or are you genuinely just really interested in this research and really think you deserve that kind of credit? So he really mentioned that as being one of his biggest ethical dilemmas within working in the research lab. Some of his other ethical dilemmas that we discussed were when he is working with mice, he has to cross mice in order to have certain mice have certain mutations. And with that, you do create a quarter of the mice due to the cross being unusable just because they don't have the mutation you're interested in learning about. What was interesting, though, is the mice that are heterozygotes, meaning they have an allele for each gene, are used to keep stock. So that just means that they are crossed again in order to create the mutated mice and the heterozygous mice again. So I found it interesting that he said one of his biggest ethical concerns within his own lab was waste, which makes sense. He also just said in general, euthanizing mice is hard. However, he's not ethically concerned with any of the research he conducts because he feels as if the university and research standards in general are very cut clear with what is ethical and what isn't. He feels like he doesn't necessarily run into tons of ethical dilemmas because of the protocol he's required to follow and because all of this research must be vetted and sort of verified and given the okay by someone above you. He also feels like he puts a lot of research in before he starts doing any kind of genetic experimentation, and it has to get approved. So he really feels like there's a firm protocol and a firm process, so he doesn't really feel like he runs into tons of ethical dilemmas in the lab. He just says it is hard because when he's working with vertebrate animals, he does everything he can to make sure they're not feeling anything, make sure they're under anesthesia when any of the experimentation is done, but it still ethically is hard to euthanize these mice and sometimes have waste. But overall, he really feels like ethically he sticks to the protocol and he feels like there's very firm kind of standards, regulations, rules in place, and all of his research is vetted. Again, he felt like one of his bigger ethical concerns was actually who gets to put their name on the paper, where and why, and if they have an agenda. So overall, I found it really interesting to talk to him. Great conversation. And yeah, that's kind of a little summary of how I thought our conversation went.